Greetings everyone, Barrett here with Hammerhead Model Making, and we are back with another full build video. In this episode, we're going to be doing the Eduard P-40E Warhawk. This is out of the Royal Class Boxing, and this is a kit that, upon release, I was very eager to get. Knowing ahead of time that there was going to be the Aleutian Tiger paint scheme in here, the one on the artwork there. This was a must. I've always found the Aleutian Tiger paint scheme fascinating and really interesting, and I definitely wanted to push this kit, ahead of the line and get it onto the workbench as quickly as possible. Now, one thing that you should be aware of when doing an Eduard kit, if you've never done one before, you're often going to be given multiple paint schemes. And oftentimes those paint schemes will have very minor differences in the way that the kit is constructed. Eduard does a really good job of giving you all these different options, and some of them might be really minor, just, small changes in the cockpit, but other ones might have some more dramatic effect on the final outcome of your build. And it is important to go through and mark or highlight all those different options pertaining to the paint scheme that you have chosen. It'll just help you throughout the construction phase of catching those little, sometimes minor, sometimes somewhat major differences between the different marking options. So, as tradition, we're going to go ahead and start in the cockpit of the aircraft. There are quite a few parts to clip out. One thing I did note in this with the Eduard P-40 is much less photo etch going into the cockpit than, like, say, the P-51s that I've recently built from them. They do an extremely good job with the plastic in this kit, and in the end, I only ended up using the instrument panel, the photo etch instrument panel from the kit, and that was it. The rest of it was either done with just the kit plastic parts or decals. So definitely feels like a slight increase in their quality and less reliance on photo etch to render certain details. So definitely something I appreciate. You'll notice here also that I'm trying out a new knife blade. This was a knife blade that was sent to me by Steady, and it's a ceramic knife blade. It's definitely interesting. It's a little weird getting used to it. It cuts nice. It definitely, I mean, it's sharp and it does its job, and I feel like it held its edge for quite a long time. It's a very brittle blade, and it doesn't allow you to do any kind of like back scraping, and if you attempt to put any kind of torque on it, it's gonna break. And I ended up breaking a few during this build just because I was trying to use it like I would my traditional number 11 blade, steel blade, and it doesn't work that way. The jury's still out on if I completely like it or not, but anyways, those are my current thoughts on this. The 3D printed seat that you get in the kit is very nice and has the belts included on it. It looks spectacular and very dynamic and three-dimensional compared to like using the pre-printed photo etch seat belts on the kit plastic. So the resin seat is definitely a nice option. I did build up the kit seat though, just for my own curiosity, and it builds up really nice, equally as nice. Just doesn't have like the nicely integrated belts, but it's still, if you got like a weekend edition of the kit, you'd definitely be fine with the kit plastic for the seat. Now you can see there's quite a few little pieces going into the cockpit, mainly around the controls and things like that. Various little bits on the floor, as well as bits on the side of the fuselage. Again, I don't feel like it was nearly as busy as the P-51 cockpits, just in terms of how many little pieces were going in there. And that just might be because the P-51 had way more variations in the way the cockpit was laid out, especially between like the Razorback version and the bubble top version. But nevertheless, still an adequate amount of detail going in here. And like I said, less photo etch that you would need. Fewer parts need to be replaced by photo etch. So definitely a nice thing to kind of keep the build going and flowing. And and again, for people that may not necessarily be comfortable with using photo etch, also a good thing. So definitely, I think that's a good direction, a step in the right direction from Eduard here. You are given multiple gun sight options. The one that is that is designated for this particular paint scheme is interesting. It does not come with the actual like glass reflector part, so you will need to source that, and I'll show you later on what I use for that. So just be aware. At this point as well, I decided to assemble the chin intakes and the oil cooler outlet area, because I'm planning on just pre-painting these, like pre-priming these ones, because I figured once they were actually on the model, like in the model, they would be a little bit harder to prime, and I wasn't planning on doing the cowl flaps on the other side of the nose open, so I wasn't really worried about like making sure these were correctly painted, just because I knew that wasn't going to be seen. So with all the construction done, we can go ahead and move on to paint. So I prepare the parts for paint by using a little bit of poster tack, some blue tack here, sticking them to essentially craft sticks, wooden craft sticks, for priming. And pretty straightforward. I do this with all the cockpit parts, all the internal parts that, you know, can't necessarily be held on their own. And because at the moment, Mr. Surfacer Primer is really hard to get, and I was trying to limit how much I was using on the build, I'm priming all the interior stuff with the the Rust-Oleum primer, and it works great. It levels well, so not a huge issue. I will use the Mr. Surfacer on the exterior of the airplane, where I want to make sure that I'm getting a much smoother finish. But at this point, we can go ahead and start, essentially pre-shading, mottling underneath. This will allow me to have some highlights showing through with the actual interior green color, and just create a little bit of contrast in the cockpit and help provide a little more visual interest. So we're going to just go ahead and get all the parts pre-shaded. Pretty simple. I'm just kind of trying to concentrate like in the center of panels, in the center of parts, and specific areas, just to create a little bit of a breakup of some of the larger, flatter areas. Next step, we're going to add a little bit of aluminum. This is going to be both for the seat, which gets painted completely aluminum, but also for the floor of the cockpit, where I want to have a little bit of exposed, metal underneath the paintwork, as the pilot's feet would be manipulating the rudder pedals, things like that, just to create a little bit of wear. So here, and there's a very distinct raised area where the pilot's feet would be, so it's easy to designate that. I'm going to add a little bit of chipping fluid here, so I'm actually applying this straight with the brush as opposed to the airbrush, because I'm really wanting to keep this very concentrated in a very specific area, and I just didn't need to spray the whole thing. Applying it with a brush does put it on a little thick, so when it comes time to actually activate it and remove paint, it's going to remove a lot of paint. Just be aware of that. Also adding a little bit to the rudder pedals as well, just so there's a little bit of wear and tear there. And then once that dries, we can go ahead and move on to painting our interior color. So this is light green chromate by Vallejo. We're going to go ahead and give a kind of a semi-opaque layer to this. We want a little bit of that white showing through, just to show a little some of that variation, but really trying to maintain that nice good green color here. And so all the interior parts get painted this, with the exception of the seat, which is going to stay aluminum, but we're going to paint the floor as well. We're going to paint over where we applied our chipping fluid, and we're going to go ahead and let this dry. I usually let it dry about 30 minutes before I start activating the chipping fluid. And the process for doing that is pretty straightforward. Just get an old brush, dip it in some water, and then you're going to apply that water onto the area that you want to chip. You're going to kind of just let it activate it for a minute, and then you can see it starting to pull up that chromate green paint there and exposing our nice aluminum paint underneath. It's really simple process, doesn't take very long. I've used this on Vallejo, Ammo MIG, and Tamiya acrylics. I haven't tried it with any other brands or non-acrylic brands, so your mileage may vary, but at least for those brands, it works really well. You can apply it with an airbrush if you want to cover a larger area, and I've done that in some other videos. If you go back and find my CH-53 video, I did some multi-layer chipping on the interior floor of the helicopter using the same product, and it can give really nice, good, convincing results. The one drawback I would say to using this type of method is that it's very random, and you have you don't really have a ton of control over where the paint chips. I mean, you can control it to an extent by, you know, where you apply it, but within the area that you apply it to, you don't you I feel like you have less control over how it chips. So just be aware. I will be showing an alternative method for doing chipping later on in the video that has some benefits, but also additionally has some drawbacks as well, and I'll discuss those further. So right now we're going to go ahead and paint the blank part of the instrument panel, as well as a lot of the smaller details in the cockpit with some Vallejo black. This is the model range color, not the model air color from Vallejo. The model air color is specifically for airbrushing. The model color range is specifically for brush painting. And there are differences in the way the paints are formulated. I am thinning this with a little bit of tap water, not a lot, just like a drop that I mix into the paint on my palette, just to help it flow a little bit better and not be quite as thick. The model color is relatively thick, especially compared to like the model air coming out of the dropper, but just be aware that. But you can just thin it with just normal tap water. You don't need to go out and buy like the fancy Vallejo acrylic thinner. That's not necessary. The tap water just does it well enough, especially for the very limited application like this. If you were trying to, you know, paint blended highlights on a wargaming miniature, for example, maybe get some like actual acrylic thinner and paint retarder, but for this application, tap water works. Painting some of the cabling here just with a light gray color. One of the things that I enjoy doing about these cockpits is kind of adding all these tiny little splashes of color in what would otherwise be a rather like uniform looking area. Just helps break things up a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and paint the seat belts with this tan color. I believe this is Vallejo's model color Iraqi Sand, I believe is the name of the paint. I like it. It's a good tan color, but you can easily, like, depending on if you want to put some washes over it or anything, you can really change kind of the overall tone of it, and quite a versatile color here. And I think it works good for the seat belts here. So we're just going to go ahead and get those painted. Again, like I said, this is a 3D printed version of the seat with the included belts, and I feel like they're very natural and they really lay well on the seat and look really nice. Definitely a plus out of the Royal boxing, but you can order it separately. Using this Vallejo Parasite Brown, this is a great color for doing leather as a base layer for leather, and then we're going to use some of this acrylic ink from Vallejo to paint some of the metallic objects inside the cockpit, picking out a few of these little details here. And the thing is, like, once the cockpit's all closed up, a lot of these details are going to be difficult to see at best, but I still enjoy the process and you know, the practice and the experience that they bring. Using some this is Citadel's Agrax Earthshade. This is a wargaming shade, but I find it works really well for trying to do leather type materials or, you know, textiles. I really like it. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and give everything a nice good shade, or sorry, a nice good layer of gloss. This is Alclad's Aqua Gloss. This is an acrylic resin gloss, and I thin it with Tamiya X20A, probably about close to 50-50 between thinner and the gloss, and it goes on really easily and sprays really nicely and hardens very, very quickly. Now, I apologize, I had a little bit of a snafu with some of my footage here. I applied a pin wash using my typical Ammo MIG, you know, dark brown wash for green vehicles over the entire cockpit. What you're seeing here is me removing it after it has dried. Well, removing the excess, I should say. But the wash does a really good job of, like, really picking out the details in the seat and creating a lot of contrast between the metallic part of the seat and the belts. So really like it here. Moving on with the rest of the cockpit. Now, the important part of doing the process of doing a wash, you know, in a cockpit, not everybody does it, and that's fine. It's a process that I like because it helps just create a little bit more depth in the detail. creates a little bit more contrast between like the highlights and the low points, things like that. But it's really important that when you're doing a pin wash is you're not doing it over bare paint. You need to have a barrier between the paint and the wash, and that's why I did the gloss coat, is that is the barrier. And you need, when you're doing a pin wash, you cannot be using a pin wash that is of the same type of paint as whatever you just painted on. So for example, if you're the type of person that likes to use enamels in your model building as your paint layers, don't use an enamel pin wash because it'll just bite into that paint. So I'm using an enamel pin wash over an acrylic clear coat, and that allows me to have that ability just to wipe it away when it's dry. Once all of the pin wash has been taken care of, then we're going to go ahead and matte coat everything. This is going to seal in our pin wash, seal in all the work that we've done up to this point, and knock down that glossy shine. And at this point, we can start getting things assembled. It's important to dry fit all of these parts ahead of time, because it's not immediately clear, at least it wasn't to me immediately clear, how the parts all fit together and how they line up. So dry fitting before you commit to glue is really important here, and it'll help you out in the long run to make sure that everything fits, because once the cockpit is all put together, it's a very tight fit into the fuselage. So you want to make sure that you're not missing anything, or something's not, something might be misaligned, because it'll cause problems later on. But if you test fit it, study the instructions, you'll get it figured out. And I was very impressed with how nicely the cockpit all fit into the fuselage and just how snug everything lined up. It was very precise and very clean. Getting the seat installed, I'm installing the seat with super glue because the seat is 3D printed resin. It will not react to the Tamiya extra thin or any kind of modeling cement. It needs to be applied with super glue. The rest of it, however, because it's all plastic, I can finish the assembly with the Tamiya extra thin. So the sidewall is starting to go on, and again here the fit's really precise, and there's very specific notches that they have to go on to, so just make sure that you're getting those lined up. But you can see here just how nicely that cockpit tub all locks together, and it's a pretty robust little sub-assembly here, and looks really nice when it's done. A lot of great detail in there, like appropriately busy, but not overwhelmingly so. There are a few parts in here that go in that at first glance you might think like, well, I'm not sure why that's going in there. I'm not going to be seeing it, but the instrument panel for the cockpit sits really far away from like the firewall, and you can actually see down in behind the instrument panel. Now it would be a great opportunity to add additional detail, because you can add like all the wiring behind the instrument panel that would be visible. I chose not to on this build. I wanted to build this one out of the box and just kind of experience the kit as presented. When I do the second kit that comes in the Royal Class box, because it is a dual combo kit, then I will go out of my way to add the details behind the instrument panel, all the wiring, things like that, because they actually give you, and I think this is the first time I've seen this from Eduard, but they actually give you the backs of the instruments. Like there's the parts that all poke out, and you'll see that eventually. You can kind of see it on the back here. Every time when I turn it around, you might be able to catch a glimpse of it. But they actually provide the backs of the instruments, which is really cool, because on other kits, it's just blanked off. And if you want to add those detail, you have to add all of the various instrument backings and things like that, and then the wires coming out of them. But anyways, so that's the instrument panel all built up, and it looks really nice. So for the actual reflector glass on the gun side, I'm just using a piece of clear acetate. You can get this off of like a lot of commercial packaging. If you buy like an electronic from a store, it'll come in those ridiculously hard to open plastic cases. That's suitable for this type of application. Hang on to a couple of those. They'll last you for a while, especially if all you're doing is gun sight glass. It really takes very little, but it's a useful scratch building tool to have in your toolbox for applications like this. I am applying it with some super glue. You do have to be careful when you're super gluing clear parts. They have a tendency to fog up sometimes. So one of the ways to combat that is make sure that you're not covering the part that you just glued with anything. Like, don't add super glue into a cockpit and then immediately cover it with the canopy. You'll end up with a fogged canopy. It needs it needs space and airflow to degas, and that will avoid some of those fogging issues. So my cat just decided to join me here, which is the noise you just heard in the background there. But here you can see, installing the cockpit, you can kind of see the backs of those instruments that I was talking to you about. You do notice that there's a portion of it that is unpainted. Again, I didn't realize the extent of how visible it would be, but I will correct that later on. But that is basically the completed cockpit. Again, very nice, extremely well done. My hats off to Eduard for this. This is just above and beyond a fantastic build so far. And full disclosure, I'm going to gush about this build quite often. All right, so moving on with the fuselage, there is something that you're going to need to tackle early on, and that is the portion of the fuselage, the back fuselage, that gets covered by the kind of the rear-facing windows. And the reason why I say this is because the way that Eduard has engineered these windows, it would be too difficult to leave them off during the painting process and apply them at the end. So it's important that you prepare ahead of time. How are you going to be painting the exterior? Each aircraft had their own unique way of how they painted the interior portion of this fuselage. In this particular case, Flossie had basically the olive drab color from the fuselage on the inside there. So I went ahead and pre-painted those, and in preparation for the rest of the build. Now I am using the 3D printed exhaust for this particular build that comes in the Royal Boxing. It's very nice, fits very well, and it looks really good. So getting those installed into the fuselage before everything gets kind of closed up. There are some parts you need to install for the tail wheel here as well. And fortunately, it's pretty easy to install that on one half of the fuselage. It's very positive how it lines up and joins, so there's no ambiguity with trying to make sure that it's going to fit both sides. It'll fit just nicely. Adding in the oil cooler outlet area here. Again, if you were doing the cowl flaps open, this area would get painted, and I believe the instructions call out for it to be like the interior green chromate color. You'd have to check your references on how that should look, but again, because I'm doing the cowl flaps closed, I wasn't really worried about painting it, just make sure it was primed, so there's that it just wouldn't be bare plastic in there. But that gets installed in there, fits really nicely, and then at this point we can get the fuselage halves together. And again, I'm always leery about making sure the fuselage is going to fit in between the cockpit's going to fit in the fuselage, and it's not going to cause any fit issues. But this one was just flawless and perfect, and it went together really nicely. I am using a little bit of masking tape to kind of temporarily hold the fuselage together as I glue it, and just making sure that I'm trying to get as much glue in there as possible to ensure a good solid join between the two fuselage halves and the cockpit. The upper cowling here, I wish, if there's two criticisms I'm going to levy against this kit, and one of them is very specific to this kit. One of them is just kind of like a general criticism to Eduard when doing these types of kits. I wish they would do the upper portion of the nose fuselage there as a separate piece. If you've ever built the Tamiya P-51D and B, both of them, they have a separate part for the upper cowl of the engine, and it eliminates a lot of sanding. And I could see Eduard doing something like that. That would make sense to me. It would be you could easily, have the part separated by natural panel lines and just remove a lot of seam work, and there's a lot of rivet detail and panel line detail that goes onto the nose of the P40 that's difficult to repair after you've been doing all the sanding. And if you had that as a separate piece, it'd be really helpful. Like, that would be much appreciated by the modeler. The second criticism I'll get to later on in the video, but it's a very specific criticism to the P40, whereas the other one's just kind of like, World War II single engine fighters in general. You are given two options for building up the wheel wells. The one that I'm using here are these like canvas boots that fit inside the wheel well to kind of help seal it up a little bit and protect the interior of the wing from debris and whatnot. As far as I understand, the Aleutian P40s probably didn't have these, or if they did, they didn't last very long. But I was curious just to see how it would look and how it would paint up, because it's got this like really nice textile texture to it that I was just curious to see how it was going to look. So that's why I chose to do it, even if it was not necessarily called out for or accurate. The kit does provide you with slide molded machine gun barrels for the fronts of the wings. I felt like the actual depth of the opening was really shallow, so I'm just deepening them a little bit with this little micro drill bit here. Definitely not like a necessity to do, but I think it just looks slightly better to have them just a little bit deeper. So again, it is appreciated that they are slide molded. You don't necessarily have to drill them out if you don't want to, because there's already a hole there, but I just felt they would look slightly better just being a little bit deeper there. But we can go ahead and start assembling the wing section. There are quite a few options here in terms of the center line, different gun configurations, things like that. So just be aware. There are holes that you'll have to drill out if you're going to be doing a drop tank or center line bomb. And they're different depending on if it's a US version or a Commonwealth version. So just be aware that there are differences with different options for the wing. The wheel wells get installed into the upper portion of the wing, and this would be true for both the version with the canvas that I've done or the version without the canvas. So just be aware. The gun inserts can get installed at this point before closing up the wings. The fit here is very nice. And you get this, and they're breaking along natural panel lines. However, I think in the end, you still have to try and sand in between each gun barrel. So I feel like it's a little bit of a wasted effort. With at least with the P51, for example, like the whole front of the wing was a separate piece, and you didn't have to worry about trying to sand in between each individual gun barrel. So, I mean, it is what it is. It still looks nice, and it is appreciated, and there's, I definitely say there's less work involved, but definitely still sanding in between each gun barrel that you have to do. Now, once the fuselage has set and glued all together, it's time to take care of these seams. I have a pretty set, process now that I use for this. And I start off with this jeweler's file. It's pretty coarse. It's going to cut down the plastic really, really quickly and leave some, pretty heavy marks. But it's a good way just to initially, even out any unevenness between the two halves of the fuselage here, and really cut down and make I think it makes the rest of the sanding part a little bit easier. So once you get through with the file, we're going to start using some sanding pads here. And I'm going to progressively work from low grit to high grit, refining it as I go along, as well as adding water to the sanding process, and wet sanding it will definitely help with smoothing things out and polishing it out. But it's just a matter of getting through or working through your various grits. I think I start with 320, and then 600, and then 800, and then 1000. So I'm just using these little sanding pads, and these are great because you can use them wet or dry. I definitely prefer using them wet, especially as I'm getting to the higher grits. I think it just makes it easier to polish up the plastic a little bit better. And just a matter of going through each seam And you can do it multiple ways. Like you can just work on one seam at a time and go from the file all the way up to your polish and then move on to the next one. I typically will do all the seam, like I'll do a file across all the seams, and then I'll do 300 across all the seams, and just kind of work my way that way. Just whatever works for you. Make sure though that in between, as you're progressing through your sanding grits, that as you're changing, wipe away your excess water, wipe away any excess sanding residue in between. I think it just helps clean the process and make it a little bit easier. So in the end, here's our final polished seam lines. It's hard to tell at this point how well I've done. Really, a layer of primer will reveal just how well I've done. We'll see how that looks later, but at this point we can start going ahead and rescribing some of our panel lines. I am just using this little micro saw by Tamiya. I find this is a good tool for doing panel lines, especially across curved surfaces like the fuselage of an aircraft. It's less as useful when doing, like, if I had to scribe a flat, straight panel line across a wing, for example. But across these curved surfaces, I really like this. I feel like it gives me a lot of control, and it's thin enough to line up with the already established kit panel lines, and it cuts through the plastic relatively easy, so I don't feel like I'm having to force things, potentially causing a slip. So that's why I use it. I know there's multiple different tools out there for rescribing panel lines, and whatever fits your style, whatever floats your boat, that's great. This is just what I happen to like here. So just going through, making sure all of the panel lines are restored where we were doing our sanding, and just I extend the panel line deepening a little bit into the already established panel line, just to make sure that I'm blending it in. Now I'm going to restore some rivets here, and I'm using this Galaxy riveting tool. This tool was kindly sent to me by one of my patrons. They know who they are. Thank you very much. This has been a very invaluable tool, with the previous gold standard being the Rosie the Riveter tool being either expensive or hard to find. This is definitely a good alternative, and it comes with 3 different sized wheels. Pretty much good for most 72nd scale and 1/48 scale projects, and the very large diameter wheel makes it easy to get nice straight lines with your rivets, and just applying some medium pressure here gets some nice good rivet lines going on. This is definitely a process. Riveting is a process I want to get better at. Pretty much at this point, I've really just kind of used this tool in the capacity that you're seeing here as a tool for restoring rivets for areas that I've sanded away. But being able to rivet an entire kit is definitely a skill that I need to practice. So with all the sanding, rescribing, and riveting done, we can kind of move on to the rest of the construction here. The horizontal stabilizers, elevators going in. Fit here was all very flawless, very nice. Great detail in the back of the tail here. Apparently there's a lot of exposed internal structure from the rudder, so it's nice that Eduard has given you all of these parts to really effectively portray that. Normally I would attach the rudder at this point as well. However, this particular paint scheme has a large white cross painted on the rudder, and instead of using the decal, I'm going to paint it, and it'd be easier to mask when it's off. So I'll be leaving the rudder off for the time being and attaching that later. Go ahead and drilling out the holes for the drop tank here and assembling the drop tank at the same time. The drop tank is very simple, and because this particular style of drop tank has a weld line across the middle, you don't have to worry about sanding it, or it's just you glue the 2 halves together and you're good to go. At this point, I'm going to be, prior to installing the canopy, I'm going to go ahead and touch up this area back behind the instrument panel that didn't get paint, because that's how it was attached to the craft stick here. And like I said, this area is visible when looking through the front canopy. So just be aware of that. You will want to get at least some paint on there. Next up, we're going to start painting the wheel wells. Like I said, this is like a canvas type material, and it's probably like a infused canvas material. I'm using this hemp color here. I think it's a good approximation of what canvas could look like. It's definitely greener than like a khaki color, for example, so just definitely trying it out. This is my first time using this color, and I'm quite pleased with it. There are some really delicate parts that build up the support structure for the drop tank here, and I was contemplating on how I wanted to build this up, if I wanted to paint these all individually and separately, or if I wanted to try and install them, and how to do it correctly and get them aligned. So I figured the best way to align them all and glue them to the drop tank, I'm not gluing them to the actual fuselage yet, but was basically just to get them all on there, get the drop tank on there, and glue it to the drop tank, and essentially use the wing as the assembly jig. So we're going to go ahead and let that dry. While that's drying, we're going to add more painted details to the interior of the wheel wells here. There are some areas that were not completely covered by canvas that would have showed the interior green color here. So we're just painting that by hand. I knew there was no way I was going to try and get in there and mask any of this off and spray it. So just using the Vallejo Model Air directly out of the bottle here. Again, Vallejo Model Air isn't necessarily formulated for brush painting, but in a pinch, you could throw a couple layers on there, and it'll give you roughly what you need. For whatever reason, brush painting it does give it a slightly different tonal look than airbrushing it, but since there's nothing directly to compare it to, not going to be a big issue here. We're going to go ahead and seal everything in with some of our aqua gloss. Again, this is so that we have that barrier between applying the pin wash, and I'm also doing this portion of the fuselage as well, because I do want to add a little bit of weathering to this, just to kind of help pick out some of those details. So here is our pin wash that we're going to be using. It's the Dark Brown Wash for Green Vehicles by Ammo MIG. This is an enamel wash. So again, don't use similar paint types when doing washes. You want to make sure it's different. So like it's okay to do like an oil pin wash or an enamel pin wash over acrylic. It's okay to do an acrylic pin wash over enamel. You just don't want to be using similar type paints and pin washes together. You're just going to end up causing a mess. So once that's dried, we can go ahead and start removing the excess. I'm just using the little cotton buds here, Q-tips, and just wiping away the excess. Again, I'm doing this once the pin wash is dried. If you do it while it's still wet, you just end up smearing it and not removing it. But once it's dried, it removes fairly easily. And if you do happen to have an area that's being a little bit stubborn, just a little bit of enamel thinner on a brush usually is enough to get that taken care of. So with the pin wash done, we can go ahead and matte coat everything, knock down that shine, especially in the canvas areas. We don't want like shiny canvas. And there we go. There's the finished portion that will get covered by the canopy and the interior of the wheel well. Very pleased with the details. Eduard's done a bang-up job here. So at this point, we can go ahead and start assembling the wing. And with the wing assembly, I'm going to go through the same process of like sanding, polishing, rescribing, re-riveting, all those things, just like how I did on the fuselage. I'm just not going to necessarily show that on here. It'd just be a big repetition of process and run time to an already long video. Using the clamps here just to make sure that the wings are locked down and holding their position while the glue sets. The overall fit here was pretty nice. I feel like there was a little bit of a gap inboard of the machine guns, but that may have just been user error. I'm not going to hold that one against Eduard. But the fit from fuselage to wing was phenomenal. Very, very nice. And again, along natural panel lines, so very little filling that you have to do. I mean, the whole thing practically just snaps into place. Like, very, very nice. And even at like the very front of the wing root, just the way that it wraps around is really nice and provides some very nice lines and natural areas for the wings to join together. Top marks there. A few extra parts that need to go in once the wings are on here. The cowl flaps going on. And now we can start installing our canopy glass. So I definitely love that Eduard is using this approach where they're providing much more of the fuselage integrated into the canopy part, and you know, having it join along natural panel lines, it just makes it so much easier, such a cleaner look, and really helps the canopy glass to blend in with the rest of the fuselage and just make it look integrated as opposed to just a part that you put on. Prior to installing these clear parts here, because there's no way I'm going to be able to reach them afterwards, I just want to make sure I'm cleaning them and removing any debris and lint and, you know, anything that might be in there to cause, you know, just having something stuck in there. Again, this is a much different way for doing this portion of the canopy than other manufacturers have done in the past. I think in the end, it's definitely a good way of doing it. It does require just a little bit of extra work. Like I said, you have to pre-paint the parts underneath it. But I think in the end, again, like just like with the front canopy, it just helps blend the clear parts into the fuselage better and make them look much more integrated as opposed to just separate parts. You will have to deal with the seam line of the two clear parts at the very top. That you have to deal with it. But I mean, you would normally have to deal with a seam line there anyway, so it's not like it's extra work. It's just you just have to separate when you do that work compared to the rest of it. But in the end, it cleans up nice, it polishes nicely, and it was able to basically get it blended in with the rest of the spine of the aircraft there. So these little parts are pretty much tricky on any P-40 kit. It's very complex shape here, and I was able to get one on relatively easily. The other one, I feel like it kind of gave me a little bit of a fight and a struggle, and I don't feel like I got it on perfectly in the end, but enough to be acceptable. And again, that might be user error on my part, so, you know, take that with a grain of salt. The landing gear has a very complex strut system, and just like I did with the drop tank, I figured I would use the wheel well essentially as an assembly jig. So I'm not gluing the landing gear into the wing at this point. I'm just using it because it's got a nice big chunky like slot that the landing gear slots into. It was relatively easy to get all the struts aligned and into place where they needed to be glued onto the landing gear leg itself, but just not the wing. And it gave me all the proper alignment and made assembly much easier later on in the build when I didn't have to assemble all these parts individually painted and separately. So very nice. The Royal Boxing does come with O masks for the wheel wells, and while yes, they are just simple circles, it is a nice thing to have, and they are reusable, so I could reuse them across multiple versions of this kit, and they will definitely, you know, earn their place in my toolbox. And I've begun buying the O masks independently for other builds just because they are quite nice and convenient. Just like these pre-cut canopy masks that Eduard provides for their kits in all of their like Profi packs and dual combos and, you know, things like that. Very helpful, very nice, and they go on without a fuss. Pretty straightforward. Just make sure that you are paying attention to the diagram that shows, you know, which mask goes onto which portion of the canopy, just so that you don't accidentally get the wrong one on there. Because once you put it on, repeated attempts at removing it and trying to reposition it can cause problems. All right, ready to move on. This is a part that I was really looking forward to, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. One thing I want to point out here is one of the things that I've started doing with all of my builds is when I get to the stage where I'm going to start painting, is I give everything a wipe down of isopropyl alcohol. And I think this is 70% isopropyl alcohol. I could be wrong, but this just helps remove any of like my skin oils or any residue from other aspects of the build, and just gives a nice, good, clean slate to start the priming and painting. As I mentioned before, I'm going to be using the Mr. Surfacer 1500 for this, not using the Rust-Oleum primer for this. I just want to make sure I'm getting a nice, good, smooth coat going down on here. And not that the Rust-Oleum doesn't do that, but I do have more control with this than the spray can, rattle can primer. Now, the reason why I was really looking forward to the painting process of this is because I might be in the minority here, but I really enjoy painting olive drab aircraft. And I know some people find it a chore and boring because it's just all one color, olive drab on top and gray on the bottom. There's nothing fun about that. But I feel like personally I have a lot of fun doing color modulations with this and trying to find nuance and subtlety in the paintwork. And so this was definitely one that I was really excited to do. Now you can see here that the primer has revealed some ghost seams. Now basically ghost seams are just, small hints of, or big hints in that case, of areas where I just did not do good enough sanding and filling. So to combat this, I'm just going to use some of this BSI super glue. I'm going to apply it directly onto the seams that need the work. I'm just applying it with a tiny bit of wire here just to kind of minimize how much super glue I'm actually applying here, because I want to keep the application maintained, confined to just the areas that need it. And now I went back, resanded, rescribed, and then reprimed everything. So now that we've repaired our ghost seams, we have a great place to start painting. And I am using for the first time some AK Extreme Metal. I've had many people recommend this to me, and I figured it was high time I give it a try, and I was very, very impressed. It was easy to paint, easy to thin, easy to spray, easy to clean up, and as you guys have all pointed out to me, it's very durable. So I am spraying some certain areas of the aircraft in the aluminum to act as my base coat for chipping. Now I'm going to be using a different chipping process than I used in the cockpit, and I'll explain that in just a little bit. But the primary areas here that I wanted to concentrate on, that I could find actual references of, were the wing roots, the leading edges, and then just a little bit around the nose. Those are the areas that I could find actual reference pictures showing actual paint chipping on the Aleutian P-40s. Now it's possible there was other areas, just those are the ones that I found. While I had the paint in the paintbrush, or in the airbrush though, I am painting a few other things with this aluminum color, including the spinner, because we'll do some chipping on that as well as the drop tank. And yeah, this was really easy to paint. I would have to begrudgingly say it was a little bit easier to use than the Alclad stuff, and from what people are telling me, that it's more durable than the Alclad stuff. So we'll see what happens in the future. Now for this chipping method, I am using liquid mask, and I'm going to be applying the liquid mask with some old sponge. So I put a little bit of the liquid mask on the palette. Don't do a lot because this stuff dries really fast and you won't be able to use it all up, so less waste. And I'm just applying the mask with this sponge, and what this allows me to do is gives me a little bit more direct control. And even though like the sponge is applying the mask in random splotches, I still have control over like where those splotches go. And it's easy if I get a little bit too much liquid mask on an area, all I have to do is wait like 2 minutes, it'll dry, and I can lift it right off and start over. It's really easy to work with. And additionally, once you've kind of gotten like the rough area with the sponge, I will come in with like a sharpened toothpick or like a sharpened wooden stick to get even more control over where I apply the liquid mask to create my chipping effect. And so I do like this method, just because, like I said, I do feel like it gives me a lot more control over specifically where I want things chipped. One of the downsides to using this type of method is it can, you get more rounded chips as opposed to like maybe angular chips that you could get from the hairspray method. So it may overall look a little less realistic in some areas, just depending on how you apply it. Right now I'm going back over all of the areas that I painted aluminum after the liquid mask has dried, and painting them with black, so that I can start the whole painting the next stages of the painting process with an even slate, as it were. If I were trying to pre-shade over the aluminum, it would end up having a different look in the overall or the end result. So starting with all black, we're going to go ahead and do our model coat here. pre-shade, as it were, similar to how we did it in the cockpit. And again, this is just going to allow us, at the very least, options when it comes to how much we want to modulate the main colors of the aircraft here, because you can spray your main colors really thin and allow a lot of this to show through. You can spray them opaque and allow very little to show through, but it does give you options in the end. And it's definitely a time-consuming process. You know, you're spraying low pressure, very tight, trying to get into panels and around details. It's time-consuming. It's really hard on the hand if you have arthritis trying to do this with a traditional top trigger type airbrush. It can be painful and it can be time-consuming, but definitely a process that I'm not about to say that I enjoy doing the pre-shading process. I enjoy the results of it, though. So once the pre-shading's done, I'm going to start on the underside. We're going to be using this dark gold gray. To me, most paint brands, their neutral grays tend to be too dark, in my opinion. And I found this dark gold gray was actually a really good in between like a really light gray and the darker neutral gray that, to me, looks good. So we're going to go ahead and do all the underside, starting off with some of the smaller parts here, just kind of get those painted and out of the way, and then we'll start working on the actual fuselage and starting to lay layers down. Now, I am spraying this relatively thin, so it's going to be, not going to have a lot of opacity to it, and that's by design. This spraying it really thin gives me a lot of control over how much paint I want to go down, how much I want that pre-shade to show through, and I can spray a couple thin layers, step back, take a look at it, spray a couple more, step back, take a look at it, and get it to a point that I am happy with it. And it's just one of those things that is time consuming, but the end results are worth it, in my opinion. So next up, for the upper surfaces, I'm going to be using Ammo Mig's Olive Drab range. Now, they have like 8 different versions of Olive Drab, and they're all formulated to work well with one another. So I am starting out with the Olive Drab base, and this is kind of just your very basic neutral olive drab color. A little on the dark side, but still a good color to start with. And I'm freehanding the demarcation between the upper and lower portions. I've seen pictures of both kind of a soft feathered edge and a really hard masked edge. I always, when I find references of both, I always tend to gravitate towards the softer edged camo. I just think it's more aesthetically pleasing than a hard masked edge. So that's what I'm going with here. Going, and just similar to how we did on the underside of the aircraft, going with a very thin, non-opaque color here, just to really build up how much paint I want on there, and how much I want to show off what's underneath it, and give myself options, because I might on other builds I might find that, like, it's not really working for me, I don't like how it's looking, and I can go more heavy and cover it and try something different. Now we're going to go with this olive drab highlight color. So this is a much lighter shade, and we're going to start picking out some other areas. And so I'm doing this in conjunction with the pre-shading that we've already done, just to create a lot more tonal variation, and trying to kind of stick to horizontal surfaces, or like up the spine of the aircraft, things like that, where in my mind I would imagine there's going to be a lot more sun bleaching, effects of the sun hitting the paint job. And then now we're going to go in with this dark version of the color and just try and pick out a few areas that might have a little bit more wear. There might be a little bit more contact with ground personnel, things like that, that might cause the color to darken, as opposed to like the sun bleaching it and lightening it. And I'm not going really heavy on this. I wasn't really going for like a crazy heavily used aircraft, but again, one that had seen some use and had seen a little bit of wear. So trying to do this as random, not necessarily randomly, but as designed as I can, with purpose. So once all the main colors are down, we can start revealing our chipping paint. Now, this thing that I'm using is basically like really dense rubber, and it's designed for removing liquid mask off of like artwork. So it's really good at gripping that liquid mask and pulling it right off and exposing our nice, aluminum color underneath. And I think this is a good way, a good convincing way of doing, moderate to heavy chipping, um, as opposed to like, again, the masking or the chipping fluid can also give good results, but I feel like I have less direct control over the look that I'm going for with that. But it's extremely satisfying to pull off the liquid mask and reveal our nice aluminum color underneath, and I feel like it's a convincing look there in the end, and yeah, quite pleased with it. So overall, I'm really enjoying really happy with how the painting is coming out at this point, and pleased with the effects that we're getting here. So we can go ahead and move on. Here is some of the smaller areas, or smaller I apologize. That was the drop tank with the liquid mask removed. Moving on to the rudder here. So I've gone ahead and masked it up, and I'm painting the white band on, or the white cross on it. There's also a white band on the fuselage that I've masked off and am painting, as opposed to using the decals. Simple things like this where they're not very complex, definitely prefer masking and painting it over using the decals. A little bit, I think, easier result to achieve. So at this point, with the major painting done, the major masking work done, there's a few more areas that I can go ahead and start painting before we start doing more further assembly. The spinner, the nose spinner, and the wheel covers are supposed to be painted the same color as the tiger, markings on the nose. And I tried my best to match the Eduard decals using the Tamiya yellow and brown here. I got pretty close. In the end, the paint, what I came out with the paint, ended up being just like a shade darker than the decals, but for someone like me that does not enjoy paint mixing, I think I did all right. So we can go ahead and get the rudder installed now, because I'm not going to need to worry about any further masking on this. And here's the spinner with the liquid mask removed. So next up, we're doing decals and weathering. And to give ourselves the best possible chance of using the Eduard decals, we're going to start with a gloss coat. Again, we're using the Alclad Aqua Gloss. This is a acrylic resin gloss coat. And that is important because it does play into, as I mentioned before, the whole pin wash thing, panel wash using different types of paints. Go ahead and give the whole model a nice good coat of the gloss. And we're painting everything too at this point, because everything going forward is either going to get a pin wash or a panel wash, or decals or whatever. It's all going to get gloss coated. And I think it's important to maintain, like, for example, like the canopy there, maintain continuity throughout the entire model. So even a part that may not necessarily get a pin wash, maintain the continuity of what you're doing to the actual model. Now, with the Eduard decals, I still struggle with them a little bit. And mainly what I'm struggling with is getting them to really conform down to details. I am using Solvaset as my decal setting solution. Normally this is a pretty aggressive setting solution and can easily melt decals that might be thinner. And even this struggles to really get those decals to conform. So what I've started doing is applying the Solvaset directly to the model first, and then applying the decal over it. I found that this has helped a little bit to both, one, make sure there's good adhesion to the model of the decal, but also to really make sure that it's getting conformed down into those recesses. However, one of the downsides to it is you have to really get the decal close to its final position before you lay it on the model, because once it starts activating with the Solvaset, it's not going to want to move, and you potentially risk ripping or otherwise damaging the decal. So essentially that's kind of my new process at this point, and I feel like it was marginally successful on this build. I have since been given new tips and products to try out with these decals, so hopefully I'll be able to, in a future video, potentially show you a different way of doing it that might yield better results. The Tiger decals themselves has carrier film that would otherwise cover where the exhaust ports are supposed to come out. I recommend, prior to getting the decal wet, is you cut that portion out. I think it'll make your life a little bit easier in the long run. The Tiger decal being the most prominent feature of this particular aircraft and this paint scheme, it was really important for me to get this right, and it took many applications of Solvaset, using a Q-tip to really burnish everything down, let it dry, let it set, and then doing it again, multiple layers, multiple different applications, in order to get it to a point that I was happy with. In between applications, I started working on smaller things. Here are the exhaust stubs for the aircraft. These are the resin 3D printed, and I mentioned earlier about having two major criticisms about this kit. The second criticism is that the kit exhaust stubs, they didn't use slide molding, so you have to drill them out if you don't have access to these replacement parts. They did slide molding for the P-51 kits, and they looked great. In fact, I ended up using just the kit parts over the resin parts on the P-51 kits because I thought they looked really good, and I could save the resin parts for a different build. This one, you do not get pre-drilled out exhaust stubs for the kit parts. I think that's a shame. But again, I'm not a kit designer, so who knows? Maybe it was just not feasible. I don't know. But as you can see here, more applications of the Solvaset over the decal, really trying to work it down into those panel lines and burnish it into a lot of those compound curves. I did end up with a gap at the chin where the two decals were supposed to meet up, but I just couldn't quite get them to line up. And I ended up having to remix some yellow paint and kind of touch that area up. If you look really closely, it doesn't quite match, but close enough. So once I was finally done with all the decals, I got another layer of gloss over the decals that helps seal them in and protect them from the next stage, which is going to be doing our panel wash. Again, we are using my go-to trusty panel wash here, the dark brown wash for green vehicles. And we're going to apply it liberally over the aircraft. So pretty much everything gets a little bit of a panel wash here, just to, again, just like in the cockpit, really helps pick out details, especially the contrast between like raised details and recessed details. It just helps create depth and contrast, in my opinion. Again, I know this is not something everybody likes to do. I enjoy it, and I think I like the result of it. So again, we're just layering the stuff on and not being shy with applying it, and it pretty much goes on everywhere exposed on the aircraft will get some of this wash. And I'm not worrying about being like, just get into the panel lights, because this thing has so many rivets on it that you just spread it out over everything, and it'll cover what you need here. So the next step then is going to be, once it dries, is we're going to start removing it. And I start off with just some paper towel. This kind of removes 90% of the excess wash. And then in some of the more hard to reach areas, we're going to go ahead and use a Q-tip. And that'll help kind of remove the remaining 5%. But you can see here that the wash is doing its trick, and it's picking out the details, the rivets, the panel lines, and even some of the rivets and panel lines on the Tiger decal are showing through. So again, a lot of hard work getting that decal to conform and settle down, but in the end, it actually turned out a little bit better than maybe I was expecting. And but like I said, hopefully I'll be trying out a new process that will make it even better. And who knows, maybe I'll even start liking Eduard decals then. We'll see. But we're going to go ahead and speed through the rest of this part here. Just don't necessarily need to watch it in real time, but you can kind of see how easy the process is and how nice it looks here. Moving on to the underside, things like that. This wash really does well on lighter colored surfaces, but so you can really see it. So the left side of the airplane that I'm holding does not have the wash. The right side does. You can kind of get a glimpse of the difference there. Now we're going to break out the Q-tip just to kind of get to some of the harder to reach areas, and just some of those areas that just doesn't make sense using the paper towel. One of the problems with using a Q-tip though is it can leave little fibers around, so just gotta check for that as you're going through your build process. But yeah, this is the point of a build that I really start having fun with, and not that I wasn't having fun before, because like I mentioned before, I was really looking forward to doing the paint job on this, but weathering is just something that I really enjoy and get a lot of pleasure out of it, and just trying new things, experimenting with new things, or a process that I feel like I've gotten really good at, and just making it work. This one's definitely going to have less weathering than other builds I've done, and mainly it's just because the reference pictures I have don't support like a super heavy weathering process. So now I'm going to seal everything in with a satin varnish. I've been avoiding, or I've been going away from using straight matte varnishes on my 148 scale aircraft. I do like having just a little bit of a shine left, but not necessarily like a full on shiny like a gloss coat would do. So this satin coat really kind of it gets me what I like to see. At this point, we can start removing all of our masking, because I'm not going to be doing any more spraying on the build. So it's always fun and satisfying to start seeing the canopy masks come off, and hoping that no overspray got inside the cockpit or onto the clear parts. And the Eduard masks did their job flawlessly on this build, and very pleased with how these came out. And again, there's a lot of nice rivet detail in and around the canopy, so I'm glad that's coming through. You can kind of see how the pre-painted area worked out on the back portion there. Very pleased with all that. So next up, we're going to start painting some of the smaller accessory pieces here. We've got the landing, or the tires getting painted. Just doing some NATO black here from Tamiya, and this is, in just a moment when I start doing a little bit of weathering on the wheels, will be one of the few exceptions to applying like an oil wash or an enamel wash directly over paint. Like I said, I usually try to have some kind of barrier in between, but it'll work out for the tires here in just a moment. But getting the propeller painted up, gonna bust out some oil paints here and kind of like a sludge wash. And so I'm applying this sludge wash directly to the Tamiya paint, and the reason why I'm doing that as opposed to like doing a gloss coat in between is because I wanted the oil paint to stain the paint. That is the effect that I was going for. I wanted there to be some like dirt staining on what would otherwise be like a rubber material. And I'm applying a little bit of kind of like a medium grayish oil paint, again kind of like a sludgy type wash to the propeller, just to create a little bit more randomness and variation in the tones of the black on the propeller. But you can see that I've also done a little bit of chipping on the propeller, and same thing with the masking fluid that we used before. Now I'm using a new process for painting the exhaust, and I was recommended these paints by my good friend down at MRS Hobby Shop, Jason, and very pleased with how these looked out. It's basically like clear lacquer paint going on, mixed with a little. Normally the clear paint has a glossy finish. I've mixed in a little bit of matte clear to it as well, to tone down the glossiness, and applying it very thin, allowing me to really build up nice layers. And I'm using this like really dark, rich chocolatey brown color here as my starting color, and now I'm going to go to black. It'll help deepen some of the exhaust color here, and yeah, this is probably going to be my go-to for exhaust going forward, at least in most applications where it matches reference pictures. But very pleased because I was able to get a good if like exhaust effect without really like having to blanket the paint on and cover things up. Like you can still see stuff through it, you can still see what's underneath it, but at the same time getting this nice good sooty effect, and I'm kind of modulating between the black and the brown, and very, very pleased, very happy with how it's turned out. So Jason, thank you for the recommendation. The final step of the exhaust is just going to be hit the very beginning part of it with some light gray, just to kind of show that lean nature of the fuel, the high octane lean fuel that these aircraft would have run on. And yeah, very happy with the results of the new process for painting exhaust. Moving on to the wheels, we can go ahead and get the wheels assembled. And I forgot to mention earlier on, but these are the cast resin wheels from Eduard. Again, they come in the Royal Boxing. These are not the kit parts. I think the cast resin wheels are kind of essential for these kits. I don't think the kit wheels look all that great. Get the wheel cover installed. And now we can start installing the exhaust stubs. These are all individual parts, and they were a little tricky to install because there's not like a good positive feedback of like, oh yes, it is where it needs to be and it's seated correctly. Just really playing it by eye, making sure that it's all lined up and lined up with the opposite side. Like I mentioned before, the kit parts are not drilled out, so just be aware that if you're getting like one of the weekend versions of the kit, that you'll either have to replace the exhaust or drill out the exhaust. But yeah, the 3D printed parts look really nice. For weathering, we're going to be using oil paints here, and this process is not unsimilar to the process that I've used on multiple other aircraft doing this type of weathering. So the basics of it are, I wet a section of the aircraft with mineral spirits, and then I start by applying the oil paint directly onto the model. No thinning, no nothing, just direct oil paint onto it. And then once I've got the oil paint where I want, I'm going to come in with a large loaded brush with thinner and start blending it. And blending in so it's not quite the appearance of like, oh, it's obviously applied paint, but really blending in those edges, getting a nice soft edge, and working through the paint so that I'm almost like doing like a filter would be like a good way to describe it. Just subtly changing the base layer color by applying this thin layer of oil over it, and just working my way around. And really for like the upper surfaces, what you see here is pretty much going to be the extent of it. Really just trying to get some like dirt and grime buildup where ground crew would be walking, servicing the aircraft, things like that. You know, loading the ammunition, working on the engine, pilot getting into the cockpit, and that's about it. Again, reference pictures didn't show a whole lot of buildup and dirt here, so just going to kind of leave it to that. We'll do a little bit more on the underside, and for that, I'm going to be doing, again, kind of going back to kind of a sludgy type wash here, and I'm going to be flicking on the spray droplets of this paint. I'm going to use multiple different colors here to kind of build up a multicolored layered effect. Basically, these airplanes are operating out of dirt strips in harsh conditions, wet conditions. You're going to get a lot of mud and dirt and debris kicked up on there, and that's really what I'm trying to replicate here. So really concentrating behind where the wheels are, where the propeller would pick up stuff. With all the major work done, now we can kind of start doing all of the final assembly. So this is really where all the little bits and pieces are all going to come together and kind of wrap up this build. And I know this has been a long video, and I've shown a lot in this, but this is the point where I was really excited to get this build done, and just everything coming together. I'm going to talk a little bit about the overall quality of the kit I think I'll straightforward with you guys. I haven't built like a ton of Eduard kits. I mean, I would say at this point maybe 10, maybe a dozen. And I'm gonna say that this is probably my favorite kit that Eduard has done, and it's just gonna edge out the FW190, which I thought was an absolutely brilliant kit. I think Eduard is moving in the right direction with this kit in some of the things that they've done. I do like that they've relying less on photo etch for the cockpit and really trying to embrace getting as much done out of plastic as possible. This is definitely a kit where I could see myself easily just building the plastic on its own. The actual like detailed instrument panel that it comes with the kit part is really nice looking. You just put a decal on it. The cockpit you could get away without using photo etch. I think the only thing that there's probably two only things you would need to really replace, and that would be the wheels and then some kind of seatbelt for it, and that would be it. Everything else I think you could easily do out of plastic, no problem. You'd have to drill out the exhaust ports, but again, you could. It's within the realm of easily to do. So I definitely think that this is Eduard's best kit to date, and I have to force myself not to immediately turn around and build the second P-40 out of the Royal Boxing, just because I have other stuff that I need to work on, other things on the bench that need to get done, but I enjoyed it that much, and the kit was really straightforward to build. I ended up building this one in just under 3 weeks. I did have a little bit of a self-imposed time crunch on this one. I wanted to get it done for the Rocky Mountain Hobby Expo, and I did with a couple days to spare. But yeah, it went together really well. There was no point in the build where I was like, oh man, this isn't going right. Like it went smoothly, and I was just very pleased with it. Like going back to like the P-51s, I enjoyed those builds, but they had their troubled spots. Dealing with the wheel wells fitting into the wings, like that was an issue. This one, there wasn't any one single thing on this kit that was just bogging me down at all. So I absolutely 100% recommend this kit, bar none. It is great. It is awesome. I am excited to see that Eduard is releasing new versions. At the time this video is coming out, the N has just started shipping, the P-40N. I'm really holding out and excited to see a P-40F. If you're not familiar with the P-40F, that is the Merlin-powered P-40, as opposed to the normal Allison-powered P-40s. That's what I'm really excited to see. So definitely hoping that comes out sooner rather than later. But any new P-40 is a good P-40 in my opinion. Yeah. You'll definitely see more builds of this on the channel. I think for the second kit in this box, I will probably do the Canadian markings. Nice camouflage, awesome like totem pole markings on the nose. Looks really cool. That'll probably be the next version I do, but there's definitely more markings out there in the Pacific Star boxing, and they've started releasing Profi packs now. So yeah, a lot of cool options for markings. And what's great about the P-40 is it was flown by so many different nations that like you could easily build half a dozen or more P-40s, never even touch like a US P-40. There's just so many awesome markings out there from so many great different countries that flew the airplane. You could have a lot of fun with this kit. So yeah, definitely recommend this kit 100%. I enjoyed every single minute of this build, and as excited as it was to actually see this thing cross the finish line, I was also sad that it was done and I would have to move on. But yeah, we'll definitely be building more. So for the final portion of this video, I decided it wasn't going to be enough just to display the airplane by itself. I needed it on a base, and I needed it to really represent and try to capture that Aleutian Island look. And so for the base work, I ended up designing and 3D printing some Marsden matting. And I'm still playing around with the scale issues. When you see it, you'll probably think, oh, that looks slightly out of scale, and I agree. But again, I was kind of under a little bit of a self-imposed time crunch and just wanted to have it done. But eventually I will redo the base to make it look a little bit more in scale, but I think it'll get the point across of what I'm trying to do. The if you look at reference pictures of the Aleutian P-40s, they were often on Marsden matting, and there's quite often like this really dark, either dark gray or black gravel sand near it. And I don't know if that's volcanic sand or what, but just very distinctive look. And half the pictures you find are in winter. Obviously, being in Alaska, they're going to have really harsh and severe winters. So the overall look that I wanted to go for was kind of like trying to replicate this awesome dark black grayish gravel with splotches of snow everywhere, and really trying to give it like a wet look. So starting off here, I've applied some PVA glue to the 3D printed base, and then I have just put in some dirt on here just to act as the quote-unquote, gravel. Primed the whole thing gray, just using some of the Rust-Oleum primer here. I didn't want to use my nice, expensive Mr. Surfacer. And now we're going to go ahead and start painting the steel plates here, just using this Vallejo steel color. Just going on, not being too careful with it. If I get a little bit of steel color onto the dirt, that's fine because I'm going to repaint over it. But just trying to get a nice, good, solid coverage over here. And again, when I designed this base, it wasn't designed to be like the perfect diorama base, because you can still see the layer lines and some of the artifacts of the 3D printing process. This is more just to like have something for it to sit on, other than just sitting on like a blank piece of wood or just on the shelf by itself. So again, don't mistake this as I'm trying to build like an award-winning display base here. This is more just to have something on there that I think looks pretty good. So we've got the dirt painted. I'm going to give it a little bit of a highlight with this dark gray here, just to create a little bit of variation, so there's not just solid black, because that doesn't look very, very realistic. We're going to do a bit of an acrylic wash here. Now, I know I just spent a whole hour talking about how if you're going to do a pin wash, don't do like colors over each other, or like paints over each other. And here I'm doing an acrylic wash over an acrylic paint. And that's because I don't intend on removing any of this wash. I'm applying it as is, just to kind of create a dark saturated effect to it, bring out the details in the 3D print itself. But I want it to look dirty and grimy and not pristine clean. So there's always an exception to the rule. The exception to the rule of don't do a pin wash of the same paint type over what you just painted. Here's one of your exceptions. Hitting the dirt with a little bit of a dry brush here. As I was doing this, I realized that a lot of that dirt kind of sunk down into the 3D printed texture. Kind of makes the dirt look a little weird. And so to kind of deal with that, I could have applied more dirt to it and repainted it. I just decided I was going to go heavier on the snow than I had originally intended, and kind of try and cover some of that up. Adding a little bit of like rust and dirt patches to the actual steel itself here. Again, just to kind of create some variation. And then finally, we're going to get everything with a matte varnish. And the reason I'm choosing the matte varnish here is because I want to create contrast between like wet parts that I'll be doing later and then non-wet parts. And so using the matte varnish kind of helps us do that. So for the snow portion here, I am mixing PVA glue with water, and then I'm mixing in some Woodland Scenic's Snowflake. Now, there's different ways you could go about doing this, and different ratios you could go about doing this. I find that the water, PVA glue, and snowflake mix works well for doing like good chunky snow. If you want like more of like a fresh powder, definitely would not be the way to do it. And I need to experiment on how to do fresh powder on a different build, not this one. But I'm just kind of basically scooping out all of the chunky snow here onto the base. And then what I'll end up doing, you'll see in just a moment, is I'm going to start dipping my brush in water and using that to kind of smooth everything out here. So you can see here how the water really just like allows me to move around the snow, smooth it out, blend it in a little bit more, and not make it look so like curdled milk kind of a thing. And again, this is gonna, once this dries, the water evaporates and it creates a nice good snow effect, in my opinion. You could additionally add like a little drop of white into the mix of the snow mix, just to help prevent any kind of yellowing from occurring later on, but so far I haven't really had any issues with yellowing. Now I'm just adding random bits of snow across the base here. Kind of what I was intending was, you know, maybe it's starting to get a little warm, snow's starting to melt, so there's not as much snow on the actual steel parts, which would retain more heat, that kind of thing. But I'm also trying to add like, you know, wheel marks in the snow where, you know, either an airplane has passed over or a ground vehicle, you know, things like that. And now I'm going to use some of my UV curing resin to add more like puddles, or, you know, like really wet effect to the base here. Just trying to keep it in and around where there's already like clumping snow. So, you know, in my mind I'm thinking like, okay, the snow's starting to melt, so it's creating these pools of melted snow. And so that was kind of the idea that I was going for here. So just applying it all over and being pretty generous with it. I'm not trying to be stingy with it. Kind of mix some of the melted or the clump snow in there. And yeah, I like the wet effect that I'm going for. And then once I've got it all in there, I'm going to use my UV light to start curing it. And yeah, so that's pretty much it for the base. Pretty simple. I think I was able to get the base done literally in an afternoon. And again, it's not going to win any awards, but I think it works. So here we go. Time for the final reveal. Now, I know this video has been really long, and if you've made it this far, I really appreciate you sticking it out. This was an absolute joy to build. My hat's off to Eduard. This kit is phenomenal. Really enjoyed it. Yeah, thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate your support of this channel. It means a lot to me. This building models is my passion. It's my hobby. It's a labor of love, and I really enjoy sharing it with all of you. And I know that might sound a little sappy or you know, or over dramatic, but I do. I enjoy sharing it with you, and I enjoy hearing from you and people telling me like, hey, I started watching your videos and I went out and bought my first model, or I used to model when I was a kid 50 years ago and I just picked it back up again. Like, I love hearing that. It is such a huge compliment, and I can't get enough of it. So thank you again for watching. Thank you for supporting this channel. Please let me know what you think down below. I love to hear from you, and I like interacting with you. If you want to support the channel further, please consider liking and subscribing if you have not yet already, and please consider joining my Patreon. I do offer on the Patreon. I do offer, you get, you know, early access to the videos. I do have exclusive weekly updates that I do on the current projects on my workbench, as well as exclusive monthly content, just kind of doing like more in-depth how-to videos or discussions on various modeling related subjects. So I'm going to leave links down below for that. I'd appreciate it, but even just a simple like on the video, thumbs up, that goes a long way. So thank you for watching. Final huge shout out to my patrons that support this channel. You guys are amazing, and I appreciate each and every one of you. And it's because of the patrons that allows me to start, you know, to do a little bit more on my builds than I normally would be able to. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Bye, everyone.